Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today, April 14th, 2021, for the Midweek Roundup, we're going to be taking a look at three important questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last few days, having to do with stories that have been popping up in the news and some thoughts that have been ruminating around in our heads about what the future of our business looks like. Now, we'll be taking a look at those three questions in just a minute, but before I do, I want to give a special shout out to everybody watching live here on Facebook. It's always a pleasure to be coming to you on Wednesday afternoons, 1 p.m. Eastern, to share our thoughts on what's some of the key issues of our day are and how they impact what we do. And we also want to give some appreciation and love out to those watching on repeat, because we know how busy our days get. You don't always get to watch live, but we appreciate you following us when you watch on repeat, either on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel. And especially, I'm grateful for those that are downloading our podcast version of the Midweek Roundup and making it a part of their weekly listening habits. So thanks for that. But let's get right into the questions today, because I know there's a lot going on in our world of international education, some pressing issues that we have that we're facing in our recruitment and getting ready for the fall and what that looks like. It's going to be hopefully very different than what last fall was in terms of students coming in. We'll talk about through that over the next several months, I'm sure, before students show up on our doors in August and September. But the first question is, kind of touching on a lot of the issues we've raised over the last few months, is there a revolution happening in student recruitment, particularly for overseas students? And there's a couple of articles that have popped up recently that have certainly given me and reinforced a lot of my thoughts on international education and international student motivations, certainly in terms of how students are finding out data. We shared our story last week about ways of delivering content, that our ways of delivering content should be changing to meet the needs of prospective students in kind of meeting them where they are. And what they're looking for is 24/7 access to on-demand content. And that isn't just a website anymore. It's the content on that site that speaks to them, that offers them opportunities to chat, that offers regularly updated content from students and other information that helps paint the picture for them about what life will be like for them as a student on your various campuses. So what that revolution that's actually going on is, I'm certainly one that believes it, that there is something that the pandemic has really accelerated international students' ways that they go about their search, ways that they find institutions. It touches very closely to obviously the digital search the ways students search for information about institutions is changing. They haven't been able to do visits. International students typically aren't the ones, unless you're the super rich, that can afford to go to different institutions in different countries to see where they might be applying. You were talking here about the revolution has been in the way, how the way institutions are using tech platforms as part of their student recruitment strategy and activity. That's clearly been a pandemic-induced or accelerated process that has taken hold at every institution that's serious about recruiting internationally, even those that hope to be serious about it at some point. And one quote I like in a Pi News article that talks about this whole revolution concept in recruitment is from Wendy Alexander, Vice Principal at the University of Dundee in Scotland. And she makes the point that what I think has changed, quote from her, what I think has changed as a result of the pandemic is a revolution in recruitment and sales that hitherto was not characterized by an online and digital engagement. And she says, students are taking control over their own destination and journey. They are stuck in their bedrooms. They just want to own what their next step is. So that's one change. So she's making the point here that what the pandemic has done is, because students have been basically shuttered away from the world, doing their classes, high school or university, depending on where they are, online for the last year. It has limited their social exposure and their ability to control their environment outside of their schooling. And it's really really creating this need amongst these students to really not let this be the way forward for them in terms of studying from the bedroom for the rest of their academic career. They want their choices to have some meaning, and this is something that I think is important. I think in a larger context, social context of when we are as humans, when we are feeling boxed in, when we tend to kind of protect what we have, but then also look for ways out, ways to keep control beyond just our own bedrooms, so to speak, or our own homes, whatever it might be. So what is happening now is that you look at some of the platforms that have gained popularity in the last 2 years. You see products from organizations like BridgeU and Seaflow that are really changing the way that students are preparing for their next steps into university. And it's all, I think, also with the digital reliance on platforms, the various policies that different countries have had. And this is in terms of allowing students in or not during the pandemic. There have been kind of sea changes in where students are looking now. Where in the past, pre-pandemic, you had Australia, New Zealand, and Canada certainly rising up the ranks in terms of popularity as destinations. But since the pandemic, Australia, New Zealand, the international ed industry in those two countries is on the verge of collapse. A number of reports have claimed because the governments there have been so concerned about keeping the number of cases down, keeping the deaths down, but at the significant detriment of the economies in those countries, particularly for universities that are heavily reliant on international students to begin with, not being able to enroll them. That is a significant blow. So that you see where new international students aren't going to be able to get into those two countries. Also China, but that's a totally different story in China. Until 2022 at the earliest. So you're looking at a 2-year run of no new international students being able to get into the country. There are many who have started their journey online with their institutions, hopeful destination institutions in those countries, but they're not able to physically get there, and not until 2022 at the earliest. So, but then you see countries like the UK that have remained largely open. Despite concerns, they enrolled fairly significant number of new international students last fall. And we'll get into other stories about how those students' experiences have been during the pandemic and whether that is going to have longer-term consequences by the poor experiences they've had there. I'll talk about that next week, I think. But you see students that might have been looking to go to Australia or New Zealand changing tack and looking at the UK, looking at the US, looking at Canada. Canada's been slower rebounding in terms of opening up, but once they do, they're ready to hit the ground running again. But there's real challenges still in terms of access to key destination market that is impacting student choices. And this is something I talk about in my 6 P's of strategic international enrollment management. It's the first P, it's perspective, is having that as an understanding that if you as an institution have been during the pandemic, yes, you've moved the way you recruit online, but you haven't necessarily changed your messaging to really appreciate the fact that these students for the last year and a bit have now been had their worlds turned upside down, that are now potentially changing destinations where they might want to study as a result of the impact of the pandemic. And if you're not capitalizing on that in terms of what you as an institution are able to do, able to offer to students, what the U.S. as a country can do for international students now, in terms of the tone of the administration, to changing policies potentially for the better, putting a much brighter face on international education in this country. If you're not responding to that as part of and have that perspective of what that student's actually going through and what their choices actually are, that is a missed opportunity if you're not taking advantage of that. So those institutions that are recognizing that are adjusting messaging to reach those students where they are, to acknowledge their current situations, are the ones that are going to be much better placed to have a better fall than potentially your competitors, who are not being as flexible and adjustable in terms of how they approach prospective students. Now, this PI News article I mentioned is really talking about some of the digital agent aggregators, talking about other platforms that are coming online to help really connect students and institutions. Those have been around for a while, but they're certainly taking on different forms, and certainly those that are becoming much broader in terms of the scope of what they can assist students with throughout their journey to applying and being admitted and enrolling in different institutions in different countries. What I think is important, and a second PI News article on this front talks specifically about the disruptive tech players, about the future of international recruitment and how it is going to be driven by big data, and it is talking about online events. It is talking about maximizing efficiency and impact. This is really what I think is coming for institutions that are flexible in their approach to international education in terms of how they package their programs, their willingness to look at alternate initial destinations, kind of using the NYU model or the Webster University model, where students can start their program in one country and finish in another, and then maybe eventually come to the U.S. for part of that journey. These are the things that how institutions look at the issue of transnational education, which is still what we're talking about with NYU and Webster and others that have these branch campuses overseas, and what that looks like and the flexibility it offers to students who may be looking to move around and have a variety of options. And this is something that most schools, it doesn't even register on their radar what TNE actually is. So it's seeing how technology will impact this as a potential area for recruitment in terms of opportunities. Just got off a call with a pathway provider that's looking at different models for how they do things. And you look at what's happened on campuses in the last year and a half. Had been happening for a number of years with intensive English programs, with the decline of scholarship students coming to the U.S., particularly government-funded ones. That English language programs have been closing down across the country or being dramatically downsized. What are you doing to potentially replace that? But maybe not replace that as if you've closed an IEP, then you're going to need an option for students that might have normally been coming conditionally that no longer can and have to wait until they get their English up. What are ways that you can partner with somebody to look at English language as a part of that journey? That can be done maybe online. If they were conditional before with a 5.5 or 6 IELTS and they just need to get up to 6.5, is there a way that can be done online to help through an online program for 12 weeks or whatever it might be? I think there's great value in that, that looking at other ways to promote your programs through creative partnerships that really leverage potentially damaging situation with having to close an IEP to potentially opening up an opportunity in certain countries to really get into a market that maybe you haven't been in dramatically before. And this is certainly becoming more evident than ever before with what's happening in China. We've seen declining interest from almost across the board in terms of interest from Chinese students in the United States. There's been some reports recently that that interest is still there. And is it growing? Perhaps, but these are very fluid situations. From one survey to the next, you can hear different stories. But the need for diversification of where students are coming from in the United States is an important piece of the puzzle. And how that manifests itself in your strategic planning, I think, is an important element that you don't want to ignore in how you use creative partnerships to really broaden your scope of how you are bringing in students. I think there's a lot of room for improvement, and certainly the concept, as this other Pi News article makes, is that that students are increasingly geography agnostic in terms of where they go for studies. And that's that perspective issue I was talking about earlier. And that's certainly reflective in this article as well. So again, all the links to these stories I post in the comments section on the Facebook page for SMIE Consulting. Certainly check there if you'd like to get if you're not watching live and you'd like to get the links to those. They'll be in the comments around this video presentation. So hopefully that becomes of some value to you. Now let's shift gears and talk to one of probably the most significant issue that's going to impact fall enrollments here in the United States, and that is there hope consulates will reopen soon? And we've talked before about this has kind of been that looming crisis, and that's certainly something that you see the language, and I think what I have seen that is encouraging me is how you do see a kind of rallying around this as an issue and an obvious concern that you saw back when the new administration was sworn in and DHS and State Department secretaries were receiving letters from ACE and that higher ed coalition of associations, making sure that this was on their radar in terms of reopening consulates. You now are seeing some more encouraging signs. An initial article last week from Inside Higher Ed says that there's another uncertain admission cycle coming for international students, and that has to do with being able to access visa appointments. That in China, still the case that they're not open yet other than emergency appointments, and that's a significant issue. There pandemic-related travel bans remain in place for countries like China and Brazil. That means that these students would have to go to third-party countries to potentially get visas now, particularly Chinese students, and then come to the U.S. To avoid that travel ban. So there are even though there are exemptions in there, there's still that uneasiness and that uncertainty. So this Inside Higher Ed article certainly does give a broader perspective on the issues involved here, and that the damage was certainly done in terms of the students that actually physically got here last fall, down 72% in terms of the new international students. Overall, down 18% in terms of total international students as from fall 2020 compared to 2019. So that what is going to be a major issue again is when consulates in China open up, when consulates in other major source countries open up. So what is the recommendation certainly have been to get this process going now before mid-May when peak visa season starts. And as for those who aren't familiar with visa regulations, students can apply for visas no earlier than 120 days before the start date on their I-20s. So for students starting middle of August, go back June, July, May, April is for middle August start dates. Middle April is usually when for earliest date you can actually apply for student visa. So that's right about now, April 14th we're talking. So if your institution starting August 15th, then right now is about when they could first go for appointments, depending on where they are in the world and availability of consular appointments. So for those starting in September, we're looking May 1st. So between now and the middle of May is when the potential rush can begin for fall 2021. And there's been a number of folks, we've already seen consular officer or the Department of State say that There is possibility for those that are renewing visas, maybe those that were stuck abroad while they were continuing their degree online that need to renew visas. There's ability to have those interviews waived. But for new students, that's not yet a possibility. But that's something that certain groups have been advocating for, is for give interview waivers for new international students coming in. For those particularly that maybe that started online last fall, that been enrolled but are now looking to physically come this fall, to look at possibilities of video interviews. That certainly is an option depending on security issues and what verification of identity and that type of thing. Those are things that certainly are going to be important pieces of the puzzle, but that needs to happen now because of the damage that has been done over the last year and a half with consulates not being open. In order to process these students before they come in time to allow them to come this fall is a major challenge. Another particularly useful article was actually NAFSA put out their COVID-19 restrictions on U.S. visa and entries that goes back for quite some time, documenting all the different areas that are still under that ban. There are student exemptions for Brazil, China, Iran, Ireland, the Schengen area in Europe, the UK, and South Africa. It kind of details what the current state of affairs is on this front. But they also go into some of the reasons why we see these bans why consulates have not been able to reopen yet. So that it's definitely worth checking out this so that you're up to speed on what's happening, because there was an updated in April 6th this year. There was the phased resumption of routine visa services memo that went out by state. Talked about some of the restraints on why they haven't been able to reopen for visa services. And that, he says, these things, the memo included from state said, local and national lockdowns, travel restrictions, host country quarantine regulations, and measures taken by embassies and consulates to contain the spread of COVID-19. Combined, these restrictions have reduced appointment capacity during the pandemic, which has created a significant backlog of both immigrant and non-immigrant visa applicants awaiting a visa interview. So that's certainly painting the picture of why that's happened the way it has. But as countries are reopening, you look at what's happened, why the UK has enjoyed so much success is they don't require the in-person interview. They have a third party that does all the paperwork processing. So those students didn't have to go to a physical consulate or embassy to have an interview to get their visa processed for entry last fall. And assuming a similar case would be in effect for this fall. So that put them at a very significant advantage as a destination market. So the U.S. certainly doesn't have that currently as an option to outsource the visa processing. That all has to go through the consulates directly. So that certainly paints not a very promising picture, other than they are looking to get back up as quickly as possible and have to work within the local conditions. We don't get anything more specific for that as to why it's taking so long. But what is encouraging, we do see some countries in India, thankfully, the second largest source country for students in the United States, that there's reason for optimism now. The U.S. Embassy in Delhi is now prioritizing student visa applicants to make sure that to allow them to be able to arrive for August, September, for start dates then. That you now see consular sections are open for appointments in all non-immigrant visa categories. So in India, they've reopened. So that's huge news, and it's certainly something we want to celebrate, particularly those that have been seeing huge jumps in Indian interest, the undergrad and grad levels, probably undergrad more surprisingly than most, having a big jump in terms of applications this year. So I think we're poised for some success from India to the U.S. this fall. certainly much greater numbers than certainly we had last fall, and certainly I would say on a definitely upward trajectory in terms of what the future is going to look like for U.S.-India student flows to us, to the U.S. So we'll see where that goes, but that's certainly a very promising one. And when we're talking about the real 800-pound gorilla in the room is China, and or dragon in this case, as to what's going to make or break this fall for U.S. campuses. It'll be that, even though there's been declining interest from China, there's been a backlog of students that started remotely or started at overseas partners institutions for U.S. campuses, or through, as we've talked about, the intl SMIE model. That have used those centers from SMIE in China to enroll students in U.S.-style classrooms for the past year, or past academic year starting in the fall. So those kind of students are looking to come, who've been in that arrangement for the last year. They're looking to come in person for the fall, but that can't happen unless those consulates are open or they go to a third country to get a visa first to come. So we'll see what happens, but there's at least initial signs now from India and hopefully other countries soon that embassies and consulates, U.S. embassies and consulates will be back up and running and making appointments available again. So that access is going to be huge, and certainly gives us some reason for more optimism than we had a couple weeks ago. But we're really looking forward to seeing more embassies and consulates and consul chiefs in major countries say that they are open for business, and they're going to hopefully be caught up with all the pent-up demand and get everybody who wants to be in the U.S. who's qualified for a visa can get it in order to make it here by the fall. So fingers crossed. We'll hope that that trend continues. Now, our final question of the day is one that I talk about regularly with clients on university visits when we're talking about kind of messaging to prospective students and to your international students as a whole, is do you need a comm plan for your enrolled students? And this is something that it's kind of strikes you as a little odd. It's like, well, why do I need to communicate in an organized fashion with my students that are already on campus? Shouldn't that just be for the prospective students until they enroll? Many schools do take that and maybe only send messages out when their deadline's coming up, or you got to get your I-20 signed before you travel, or if you're applying for OPT, you got to have this information. So those standard messages are important. But if this last year has taught us anything, is if you're, as an international office, ISSS office, or a larger international ed office, are not communicating regularly with your currently enrolled students, it can potentially lead to miscommunication. It can lead to bad feelings arising when they feel that they're not being heard or their issues are not being addressed. We saw schools last summer that when things were moving fairly quickly in terms of government policies, in terms of if you're going hybrid or online, you wouldn't be able to come, returning students wouldn't be able to come back, new students wouldn't be able to enroll. There was real uncertainty. But for returning students, at some schools, there was no communication letting them know that their institution knew that these things were going on, knew that these situations were being discussed, and didn't have a plan in place necessarily to answer those questions. So I think it's important more important now than ever when you have these times of uncertainty, that you have a communication plan in place for your currently enrolled students, because if you don't, there's opportunities for negative situations to occur that can impact that student's overall impression of your institution, not just your office. Figuring that you don't care because you're not answering not addressing these issues that are obviously big ones for them as international students. So, and certainly international students over the last 4 years, once they've been enrolled in your college campuses, there's always been something happening in the previous administration that was cause for concern, whether it be about OPT, whether it be about immigrants to the United States and how they're viewed and policies that would be implemented that potentially negatively impact them. All of this should have given many opportunities for campuses to develop these kind of mechanisms to get the word out and to reassure currently enrolled students about how your institution viewed them and how your office viewed them and their needs, and that you were looking out for them. And more than anything else, that just that communication flow that shares with them that, hey, we understand there's uncertainty here. We want you to know we're looking out for you and we're going to do everything we can. That message will create a lot of goodwill, I think, when institutions can do that with their current students and can personalize it and make students feel like they're being heard. So I think when you talk about strategic international enrollment management, this is something I've been preaching for years, but when that process of strategic enrollment management does not end when the student enrolls. It's enrollment management. You're managing their enrollment throughout their time here, not just to get them in the door. It's a full life cycle process that you have to have strategies in place for how you're communicating with this audience, how this important student group is handled by different offices on your campus, that they're aware of their issues and that they have mechanisms in place to address them. If this isn't a part of your college's process, give me a call. We'll work with you on developing a communication plan. And I'm dropping a link to an article that does require NAFSA membership to get access to, but it's entitled Effective Communication Plans and Platforms for the ISS's Office. So this is, again, talking about the journey of that international student on campus and what that looks like. And I work with several clients when I do program reviews to hammer home this point about the communication doesn't just stop when enrollment starts. That it needs to be an ongoing process that makes that international student know that this office, this college, this university is aware of their issues and is willing to address them in a timely manner, and oftentimes be proactive about it. The more you can do that, the better impression that's going to leave with your currently enrolled students, and the better end result that will be for you, and depending on how you leverage that relationship, potentially having them, when they graduate, become promoters for your institution and to share their stories about how you handled, how your institution helped them during uncertain times. And that means a lot, and that is recruitment gold on the front end. So when you can leverage those stories throughout the enrollment process. So that's what we have for you today from the Roundup, and we're looking forward to continuing this conversation in the weeks and months to come. But for now, I want to say thank you for being a part of the Midweek Roundup. It's always a pleasure coming to your offices, your home offices, wherever you may be, or on your run or walk. We appreciate the chance to share our thoughts. So until next time, have a wonderful week. Cheers.